Sam Tanenhaus is with us. Sam is the author of a new book, The Death of Conservatism. He's also the editor of the New York Times Book Review and Week in Review, prize-winning biographer of Whittaker Chambers, presently writing a biography of William F. Buckley. That must be fascinating, Sam. Welcome to the show.
Well, it's good to be here. Yes, Buckley is a fascinating and complicated and kind of wonderful creature in his way. I learned a lot from him.
I was a big fan of Firing Line, and I wrote a book 15 years ago or so, for which I interviewed him briefly, and I quoted him in the book. Oddly enough, about attention deficit disorder and his own use of Ritalin and his own, I'm sure you've read his autobiography, Overdrive.
Oh, sure. Well, that must have been an interesting interview.
Yeah. Which Overdrive is the, if you look up adult ADHD in the dictionary, it should say read Overdrive by William F. Buckley.
Absolutely right. He's pretty open about it too.
Yeah. He was not making a secret of it, which is why he allowed me to quote me in my book. But in any case, I The Death of Conservatism, your new book, I find fascinating here. You go all the way back to Burke, Sir Edmund Burke, who although I didn't see his most famous quote in your book, and maybe I just missed it, that he was opposed to people voting if they were not, there was a big argument in America about whether or not they were landowners, but he felt that they should be landowners and rich. He said it does me no harm if, I'm paraphrasing from memory here, but it does me no harm if a man is allowed to participate in a servile profession such as hairdresser or tallow maker, candle maker, but it does society considerable violence if such a man is allowed to participate in the decisions of governance.
Well, you have to take people in context and in their times. And remember, it was also Burke who objected to the American colonists having seats in Parliament because they were slave owners back then.
Yeah.
So, the world was a different place back then, no question about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And conservative and liberal meant different things back then. George Washington aggressively and openly called himself a liberal, although I'd say he was probably more of a modern-day liberal. You refer to Gary Hart in your book as a neoliberal. I spent a week with Gary Hart on a cruise last year and found him to be a fascinating guy. Why neoliberal?
Because he was one of the first wave of Democrats who, back in the 1980s, saw the party was just exiled from power, had become what in the book I describe as a moon party. It was orbiting outside the mainstream of politics. How to get back in? Well, one way to do it was to look hard at where the party and where certain liberal ideas had led them, honorable ideas, but maybe that weren't so much in touch with the center of the voting population, and rethink them, which is exactly what conservatives need to do today. They've become the moon party.
Yeah, and they absolutely have.
Yeah. They're kind of outside. If you look at the big issues of the day, the stimulus and health care, those are our two big domestic issues. It's not so much that Republicans object to them. That's part of the role, is to form an opposition. It's that they vacated the field.
Well, it's and Sam, within 18 months, it's going to become cap and trade and immigration as well. It's going to keep on moving. But I'd say Gary Hart was a neoliberal because he embraced internationalism. He embraced CAFTA, NAFTA, WTO.
He also, he was a brilliant guy. I think Gary Hart was one of the real tragedies of modern American politics, was some of it brought on by himself. He was extraordinarily brilliant. He also
still is, by the way.
Still is. In fact, he writes for me at the book review.
Yeah,
he reviews very serious books for us. He really had a sense to, absolutely right, of the global dimension of politics, also of the military. He was the one who wanted us to reconfigure our military, make it a lot cheaper, make it more efficient.
I agree. But here's my concern.
Yeah.
And we're talking with Sam Tanenbaum, his new book, The Death of Conservatism, and we only have a minute and a half or so here, Sam. I'm sorry. Or Tanenhaus, excuse me.
Don't worry about it.
And nytimes.com. My concern is that the conservatives, the people who call themselves conservatives, are not taking classical conservative positions. And if you're writing a biography of William F. Buckley, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, they're radical.
And the liberals who call themselves liberal, with a few exceptions, people like Bernie Sanders and Russ Feingold and the late Ted Kennedy, are not taking true liberal positions. Everybody is dancing to the tune of big corporations who have seized the political discourse in this country. What do we do about that?
Well, that's a great question. One of the interesting things about the true origins of conservatism, not so much the Burke era, but the 19th century, was that it was the fear of the corporation.
Yeah, I know.
The corporation.
Well, it was the same with the liberals too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and The idea was that if you're going to keep society together, make people responsible to one another, you can't let the guys who are really after the big bucks all the time call the shots.
Right. So in 30 seconds, what do we do? Bring back Teddy Roosevelt?
Well, one thing we do is to regulate, which we're beginning to do. Listen, you're never going to drive it out. That's partly what America is about, entrepreneurial spirit and all the rest. But you have to regulate it really, really closely, and you can't treat the marketplace as it is a theological end in and of itself, which is what the right has done for a long time now.
Yeah, tragically, actually, they've elevated this so-called free market, which obviously doesn't exist. A market doesn't exist until the government establishes the rules, just like a football game doesn't exist without a football field and referees.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
So, yeah. The Death of Conservatism, a very thought-provoking book by Sam Tanenhaus. Sam, thanks for dropping by today.
My pleasure.
Great talking with you.